Welcome to a new episode in our series Traditional Astrology and History of Traditional Astrology. We welcome our guest, Dr. Luis Ribeiro. We had him before on our show in a very nice and interesting talk for 2.5 hours. I don't think we will need that much time this day. Hello, Luis in Portugal.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
And we prepared a special site on our main site, Traditional Astrology. And if you scroll down, you find the subsite about the Astra Conference 2023, which is the topic of our talk today, the tools of the art of astrology, and with our guest, Dr. Luis Ribeiro. Now, if you want to know something about the background of Luis and of Helena Avila, his life partner who died unexpectedly in 2021, you go to this film list, and there you have the 2.5 hours I talked about, and then there is a very interesting talk of Luis with Oraculus podcasts about practice in traditional astrology, and Helena Avila and Luis Ribeiro with Chris Brennan, and the life and work of Helena, and my own interview with Helena in 2020, and an interview with Robert Zoller, who was the teacher of both Helena and Luis. So if you want to know about the background of today's talk. Now, if you go on the subsite, the conference took place in Portugal, but before we go into the details of the conference, let's have a look at the Astra project, the organizing unit of this conference in Portugal. And now, Luis, you have the stage. Tell us about the Astra project.
Okay, the Astra project is an academic research project which is hosted here at the University of Lisbon in SUCT, which is the center, the Inter-Universitary Center for the History of Sciences and Technology. It's hosted at the Faculty of Sciences here in Lisbon. Together in partnership with the Warburg Institute and also the IKGF in Erlangen, which is a project that is now finishing. And the main goal of this project, who came out, was conceived and was born, let's say, in around November 2018, was to create a platform where historians of astrology can discuss the history of astrological technical knowledge. And this was a result of both Elena and mine's research, where we focused a lot on the history of the development of astrological methodologies, how the techniques developed through time and how they affect both the scientific development, the instrumental development, and vice versa. So, and this was something that she was focusing more than I in her PhD, and so this platform was created. A conference was advised. It was presented at the Warburg at the conference that at the same conference that presented Charles Burnett's book translation of Abu Mashar, who came out at the same time. So we presented the Astra for several scholars there, and we got a very good adherence. And today we have a number of scholars associated with the project. Here is Helena's book, who came out.
This is your book.
This is mine. Helena's just passed by.
This is Helena's book, yeah. The notebooks of hers, barely. For our readers in Hanover, where I am at the moment, you can get the book of Helena in the Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz University Niedersächsische Landesbibliothek. It's available for the readers, and hopefully the same is valid for this book. This is not yet delivered. Brill is the publisher, and they said that it will be delivered this month, but it takes about 3 to 4 months before it's available in the library. So you can read both PhD dissertations of Helena and Luigi. Okay, carry on.
Okay, so so the project continued. We had plans for a big conference in 2020 here in Portugal, but then, as we all know, the pandemic started, and we still postponed it to 2021. The pandemic continued, and then Elena passed away, and it was only this year that I was able to go forward with the conference. Yeah.
Was this conference, as it took place this year, the original plan, or were there changes since 2020?
Well, there were a few changes in the lecture topics. The people invited, because unfortunately we lost also Shlomo Sela, who was one of the lecturers in the first iteration of the conference.
The famous editor of Abraham Ibn Ezra's works.
Exactly.
That's a shame. He couldn't complete his work. He finished the 8th book, but the other ones will probably not see the light of day.
Yeah,
that's
hope.
A shame.
Yeah, let's hope his colleagues can pick up on his work. And
do you have hope that there are colleagues picking up his work?
It could be.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes it happens. There are always a few books by scholars which they left, if they left enough notes to create a volume, even if it's partial.
Oh, okay.
That's
do you know the people in Jerusalem or in Israel? I'm not sure where the university was. Was it Jerusalem? Tel Aviv?
I don't. No.
You don't know people there. So there's no connection of the project of the Astra project with the Israeli university where Shlomo Sela was doing his work.
No, not at this point. I don't know if there's anyone there working on history of astrology. No, not there specifically.
So here we see the research team.
Yeah.
Occasional researchers participating, and we have the scientific advisors, and you have the creme de la creme of basically the world of his history of astrology. Would you say that this assortment of researchers is basically the whole field?
Well, not completely. We still don't, there are a few people that either couldn't accept or didn't want to participate directly. They were too busy. But yes, I think we have a good representation of the field, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, now let's go to the conference and go back to our subside. You have decided to organize the conference in Batalha. For people who don't know about Batalha, Batalha is one of the most famous Portuguese historical sites, because that's where your independence derives from. Could you tell us a little bit about this history of 1385, I believe? 1385, I believe.
Yeah, that has to do with the succession from the first dynasty to the second dynasty of Portuguese kings, because the king died with no direct heirs. So his bastard son was risen to the throne, which later became John I of Portugal. And of course, there were people from the side of Castile that had claims also to the throne, especially the King of Castile, because he was married to a daughter of the king. But so the war that happened in Batalha, and Batalha means exactly a battle, as the name.
The battle was 3 kilometers south of Batalha, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so because they won and established the second dynasty, the monument, the convent was made, the monastery was made as a promise, to fulfill a promise, so that they had, because they had won the battle. So what we see nowadays, and it's a beautiful monastery, it's perhaps one of the best examples of Gothic classical, let's say, classical Gothic art in Portugal. And it has several generations built into it, of
I wanted
course.
to ask you about this. In one of those videos about Batalha and the monastery, somebody said that it's comparable to York in England. Does this mean that the architect of York had an influence on the building of this cathedral? You
Not
wouldn't
that I
know.
recall.
Oh,
Not that
okay.
I recall.
Okay.
I think it was more northern France and northern Spain that had
Oh,
some
okay.
influences. I don't recall exactly that process,
Okay.
but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It's always very difficult to establish that kind of connection unless
Yeah.
the architect was from York. I don't recall being from York. I'm not sure.
Okay. I remember in one of those videos that somebody said this is a place where loads of tourists are every day, and this is one of the very few moments where there were not so many tourists when this video was made. When you were there these 2 days in May, 6th and 7th of May in 2023 for the conference, is that right that this is a place where the tourists crawl all over the place?
Yes. Yes, well, we didn't. May is still not in high season, so we didn't have, a massive number of tourists by then,
Okay.
fortunately.
Yeah.
But the town, this is a very small town in the center of Portugal,
It's
so it's
800 people, inhabitants,
yeah,
and a lot of villages outside.
exactly,
Yeah.
and it was filled with tourists. People from everywhere were going there to visit. It wasn't packed with people, but there were a lot of
Yeah.
foreigners visiting. Yes, there
And
always are.
the conference was organized in the monastery. Now, the monastery has the cathedral, as we can see, and then there is a special side of the place, like a cloister, this one.
This
Did the
one, yeah.
conference took place here?
Yes, yes, in the upper floor of that cloister, we will say, yeah.
Oh, okay. Very good. So we have an impression of the location. Now let's have a look at the conference.
Yeah.
And the conference project is here. The prospect. Now my first question, the conference title is The Tools of the Art.
Yeah.
In my subsite, I supplemented that with the tools of the art of astrology. Was there a reason why the two words of astrology were not integrated in the title of the conference? Because tools of the art could be anything.
Yeah, it could be, but we didn't want to repeat the name in the subtitle, which already has new perspectives on the history of astrological doctrines and practices. So
That's the reason why.
that was the main reason. It would repeat the title.
Yes.
So we decided for a more poetic, let's say, if we could say that title. But actually, yeah, I think it became known as the Astra Conference, and very few people alluded to its title, actually. Yeah, that's how it became, which was interesting.
So should we call our video the Astra Conference in Portugal 2023?
Yeah, it's the first Astra Conference in
Okay.
Portugal. Yeah, it could be.
Astra,
Yeah.
you mean Astra, not Astro.
Astra, yes.
The Astra Conference. Okay.
Astra Conference. Yeah, Astra Project Conference, if we want to be complete. Yeah.
Astra Project Conference in Portugal. Now we have some speakers. My next question is, some of them couldn't attend. I believe Martin Gansen had private problems, so he couldn't leave Sweden. But there was another one who was, Stefan Heinen was not there, right?
Yeah, Stefan Heinlein also could not attend in person, and at the last minute, David Just also had to make some last minute travel arrangements back home, so he couldn't join us in person as well.
So the opening was online. David Just.
Yeah, David Just was in Australia at the time, so he had to be the opening, so we could fit him in the proper time zone.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then we have Martin Gansen online and Stefan Heinlein on. And the rest of the people were there, especially the Grand Seigneur of History of Astrology, Charles Burnett was there.
Yeah, Charles,
now, let's start with the energy of the conference. How did you personally experience? Well, you had a load of work because you're one of the main organizers.
Yeah.
How was it for you? Was it stress, or did you have some time to enjoy it?
Well, I did enjoy it. I enjoyed it. Once everything was set in place, I enjoyed it very much. But as an organizer, you're not always 100%, paying attention to everything that's happening, because
Yeah.
at least when people are speaking, because you're always concerned, is it recording? Are people getting in properly? Are the microphones doing it? I'm always moving around everywhere, making sure everything is working together with
Yeah.
my team. But yes, I did enjoy it. I think we had a set of lectures, of very interesting lectures, all of them with some contribution. And I think sometimes it's difficult, but I think everyone presented something new to the field, and the general public will be able to see that once the videos start rolling up, which should be at the end of this week, if all goes well.
And we have to be grateful for you being an intelligent man, because there are some organizers of conferences. Your conference had something like 50 people attending, I think. And so there are some conference organizers who organizes conferences for 50 people, and then they forget about it, and nobody knows what happened there because nobody is recording. But you did recording. Thank you for that, because I'm looking forward very much to watch the videos you are uploading this month. You spoke about team. Who was in your team, and who were those people?
Well, actually, the team was the Astra team that we saw earlier. They were there, as volunteers helping me. Eunice, which is a PhD student, who's currently Nis Santos. He's doing a PhD on astrometeorology in Portugal. Well, let's go back to them. Yeah. So Levente was there as a speaker, and he's no longer a PhD researcher. He got his PhD quite recently. This page has to
Congratulations
be
to Levente.
updated.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So this page needs to be updated quite urgently.
Yes,
But
okay.
unfortunately, I cannot be everywhere at once. But I'll have to get to that now in the summer. So Eunice, which is a PhD researcher, she's one of my PhD researchers. She's studying astrometeorology, the practice of astrometeorology in early modern Portugal. And then Marta Passadeiras and Carolina Rezende are MA students who are now finishing, and they are also doing, this is all at the University of Lisbon in our research center. They're connected with it. So they're also finishing some aspects of the practice or the study of astrology in Portugal.
I, rea
Marta, yeah.
I realized that the fee for the conference was rather moderate, something like 20 euros.
Well, we were it was it 20 or 10? I think it was 10 euros.
Okay.
10 euros. Well, it was because we realized we had external funding, so we could afford to get whatever we needed set
How
up.
did you manage to get external funding? In our last talk, the 2.5 hours talk, we were talking about the problem of getting funds. How did you manage to get funds for this conference?
Well, fortunately, the monastery had available funds
Oh,
to produce, a scientific event such as this. So we had that already negotiated that with them. So they were the major funding entity. So them through the how do you call it in English, the administrative body who does the administration of all
yes,
the monuments in Portugal. So
yes.
they are the funding.
Okay,
So this is a governmental fund.
okay.
Of course, our own research center, the SUGT, also assisted with some additional funding, and we still managed to get some funding also from the editor Moleiro, the Spanish editor that does those beautiful, fabulous facsimiles of ancient manuscripts. And also, of course, we were also got some assistance from the local municipality, who also helped with some of the practical stuff like coffee breaks and transportation and all of that. So we're very grateful to all these entities that allow us to do this without having problems. So that's the reason why the fee was low. I know we also consider since the beginning that Batalha is not easily accessible like Lisbon is. So it's not terrible, but you need to go by bus or by car to the place, get a special get some lodging there of some sort. So we thought, if we want people to give the opportunity for people to come even from abroad, let's make the fee just the basic, just a more symbolic contribution, and because we have the rest taken care of.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. The conference took place in Batalha. You could have gone to the monastery of Geronimo in Lisbon, because this monastery in Batalha was discontinued in 15 something by King Manuel, who decided to create a new monastery in Lisbon itself, and some of the chapels are not finished yet in Batalha. Why not use the same funding structure and organizing structure for Lisbon itself, and avoid some of those problems?
Well,
or is my impression wrong that the same people would have funded this in the Geronimo Monastery as well?
They do, but it's a different managing team. So the director is someone's different. So, which I have no contact with. Perhaps they would be interested in organizing this.
Okay.
But I'm not.
You had the contacts to Batalha, and that was.
Yes, I have organized several things in Batalha. Academically speaking, so I have that connection already.
What did you do there? What sort of events did you organize before?
Yeah, we did a big, not a big, but a conference in 2016, where Charles Bonnet was there, and Josefina Rodriguez Arribas was also there, and some other scholars on medieval knowledge of astronomy and astrology.
Okay.
We did that, and I've also organized more how shall we call it, weekend seminars for the greater public, on several subjects like pre-modern astronomy, pre-modern art. So I have experience in organizing things there from time to time. So I had this contact, and because why make it difficult? And
did you have the lodgings in the monastery, or did the people live in hotels?
Oh, hotels outside.
Okay. And how about the food? I saw in the videos about Batalha there are a lot of restaurants. Did you have eating in the monastery, or did the break came up and then the people went to the restaurants?
No, the coffee breaks were actually in the cloister, so in the upper level of the cloister. We had a few tables there with the coffee breaks.
Lunch and dinner?
Lunch and dinner would be outside.
Okay. And when you did lunch and dinner, did the whole group of 50 people went to one restaurant which we had reservations, or did it just disperse in the town?
No, people dispersed. We would go with the dinners. The coffee break was included, but not the lunch or dinner. So people would have their own arrangements. We just.
I heard from one of your from one of your participants that you personally talked in a coffee break about how you got drawn into the discussion of the whole sign houses discussion. Are you willing to elaborate here what happened? Because when we talked and emailed each other, you were not interested at all to get involved into this heavy running discussion between Deborah Holding and Chris Brennan. And now I realized, talking to one of your participants, you might know who I'm talking about, that you personally in a coffee break talked to. I got involved in this bloody mess. How did that happen that you got involved?
Well, I'd rather not discuss that in this context.
Not
But
publicly. Okay. I will ask
I
you
can
after the recording.
yeah. Yeah, I don't want to bring that, that's one of those rows and messes
Yeah,
that
yeah,
pop up now and then.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
I remember when we talked about houses, and I refer the viewers to our 2.5 hours video. We were talking in length about what you think about the necessity to have a quadrant house system if you want to be detailed in the delineation. So that's still your opinion, I suppose. That
Yeah,
nothing has
is.
changed.
It
Has
is.
changed there.
What I can say here is that the problem with these discussions is that, and this is not directed in any other side of that specific fight. People get very personal about things.
Yes, yes.
That's the main problem. At the core of all of this, it's people get very personal and don't really discuss things, in a neutral manner as much as they can.
Let's concentrate on what you said in the last video. They lack the capacity of critical thinking.
Yeah. Oh yes.
Okay, let's go back to the conference.
Yeah.
Now, when we're talking about organizing the thing, 50 people, all you had to do is register them when they arrive and give them their vouchers for being participants. And what was the experience in the breaks? What themes were additionally discussed, which we will not see and will not be able to discuss about the program? Was there a lot of input and discussion going on in addition to what happened on the conference on the speaker stage, or did they mainly discuss the speakers?
Well, I would know. I didn't. I wasn't part of all the debate, but I think people discussed several things, what had been said, and others, because we had quite a mix of people. We had people interested in the academic facet of the history of astrology. We had people who study or practice astrology that were there because they're interested in that. In that facet of astrology. So we had a very diverse public in that regard. So the discussions were many,
Okay.
from the conference to other practical stuff, from current events in the
Yes.
astrological field and all of that. So
yeah. When in our last talk we were discussing the Amsterdam conference of 2004 and then the problem with Robert Zoller's presentation, and there the problem with Robert Zoller you mentioned was that he came with his talk into an academic conference talking about astrology is valid and you can do certain analysis in history just by looking at charts of historical figures, and that was a real problem in Amsterdam. Now on this conference you have mentioned right now, there were people who were practicing astrologers. Even some of the speakers are practicing astrology. You yourself are headmaster of an astrology school where everybody can learn astrology online from over the world in your courses. How did that mixture get along? Some of those people on the stage are not practicing astrologers and would not accept the theory that astrology works. Am I right?
I suppose so, but I think everyone there, even the people who are not practicing, have a respect to others people's perspective. So one of the things that this group of scholars, and here I mean those who are attending and others which are associated with the Astra, is that they are respectful of people's beliefs, personal beliefs, or personal choices in terms of accepting astrology as a working tool or not.
Okay. Okay.
And I think this is an important point when we're talking about an academic event such as this. Elena and me always separated very clearly, and I still do it, my astrological life as an astrologer, as a student, and my academic life, because it's something that doesn't mix well. And although it's better, I think, not sure about this, there's a lot of prejudice. So if you come in as, oh, I'm an astrologer and I'm studying this, you have immediately a series of doors and some windows shutting down in that other person's mind, in an academic's mind. So if you separate things, it is better in that regard. Also, in terms of your own work, one thing is what I think works or doesn't work in astrology. The other thing is the historical reality. So the people I studied so far sometimes are doing things astrologically that I think are quite sound and interesting. And sometimes they make some choices that, as an astrologer, I would say, oh, I don't think they're right here. But that is irrelevant for the historical context, because I just have to report and understand why they make that choice, whether I agree with it or not. I'll give you an example. In my work with the Jesuits that we'll discuss in detail some other time, they're very bound to Catholic rules regarding astrology, which is something that today we're not, and we would disregard them completely. But because I'm studying how they interacted with that, I have to go with it and understand what is their point of view. So I have to avoid, as any historian does, to put as any biases I have regarding that topic and others. So it is good to have these things separated. Otherwise, if you go into academic conferences, like you see in astrology conference, people asking, oh, what's your sign and what time was it, gets silly. I don't like it. And I always advise my students not to do it. You know, it looks silly. We're there to discuss history, not astrology. And there's a difference, you know. And for the academic world, we're discussing a practice that, but for most people, died out. It ended with the end of the early modern period. Although, of course, that's not true, because astrology is practiced today. So, but not as a scientific topic. And I am an historian of astrology, of course, but I'm also an historian of science. And as an historian of science, I have to put things in its proper context. You know, so for example, history of science rarely dwells into astrology after the beginning of the 18th century, because by then astrology was removed from the scientific thinking. So we don't, someone studying, for example, history of astrology in the 19th or 20th century, which is quite an interesting topic. There are very few works done on that. There's some stuff for England, but we have the rest of the world to explore yet. And no one seems to care too much about that. They're not doing that from the point of view of the history of science. They might be doing from the history of pure history of culture, history of society, something like that, history of ideas, but not from history of science, because it's no longer a science at that time. So we need to know when to have certain discussions and when not to have certain discussions, because there is an advantage, and I think any good academic recognizes, and this has been a good, what's the word? A good contribution to the field of the history of astrology, is that if you get an historian of astrology who knows the practice, understands the practice, it can go into certain levels and certain levels of discussion of the technique and the methodology that an historian that doesn't have that training cannot. And this has something the early historians of astrology didn't go too much into this. the historians of mathematician have discussed it, calculation of house systems, and all the astronomical factors, but still, that's the astronomical facet. They're not discussing how they use that in interpretation. And that was lacking until we got people with knowledge of astrology, with proper knowledge of astrology, and with proper academic training. Because the fact that you know a bit of astrology or some of astrology doesn't give you the ability to do historical work immediately. You need to have proper training in the history of in history as well, in historical research. So this is a good advantage. And nowadays we are having a more in-depth analysis, a more what we call an internal analysis of astrology. What are they doing? What are they seeking? What are their needs in terms of technology and calculation so that they can accomplish the judgments and the interpretations they want to do? It's starting to develop because we have the input of people which have technical knowledge. Some of them are astrologers or were astrologers at some point. Others are not. There are people who studied astrology, but they're not astrologers. They never were. They have no intention of being, but they have some technical knowledge enough for them to do that in kind of interpretation. So this is an important point, because we have sometimes a lot of astrologers jumping into the academia, not necessarily through history. But it's not enough to know astrology, and you need to know astrology well enough. You have to really think what you're doing about what you're doing. You have to have some kind of ontological process of what the hell am I doing? What is this in terms of knowledge? Not many do that. So we have a lot of people who just have delve into astrology, I would say. They just dabble into astrology and then go into academic setting where they might not have the proper training. So sometimes we have some very biased and diluted academic work that is not really doing a contribution, in my view. And sometimes you do have a very good work being done. But if you are going to go into academia, you really need proper training. And I think that that's crucial. And you're studying the sociology of astrology, the history of astrology, the cultural aspects of astrology in society and in history. But people have to realize that they're not studying astrology. As an academic, I'm not studying astrology and how it works. I'm studying its history specifically. And it's, of course, consequently, its cultural impact, its sociological impact, but not astrology itself as a working knowledge. That's outside academia. And I think it will be for quite some time. I'm not seeing that coming into academia anytime soon. Because it doesn't fit in the current epistemological model of how science works and how knowledge works. For science and for our current modern knowledge, astrology is something that doesn't really have a good explanation, doesn't have a system. It's completely incoherent among itself, within itself. Has absolutely no critical thinking being done.
No peer review structure.
No peer reviewing at all. I think there's an allergy in the astrological community to peer reviewing. They're allergic, because and the main symptom of that allergy is deep personal offense.
Yes.
And as an academic, I'm used to be peer reviewed. Do I like it? And do I like to hear certain things about my papers and my writings? No, I don't. No one does. But you have to be grown up, have a deep breath and see if the other person is doing a valid criticism. Because sometimes in the peer reviewing process, people raise important points, things that you're not explaining properly, connections which you present, which are not really solid enough to be exposed like that. And you can learn a lot in this peer reviewing process. And astrology doesn't have, people say the most absurd things at astrological conference, and
Yes.
everyone claps, and everyone say how wonderful it was, how beautiful, how inspiring, how intuitive, and stuff like that. And sometimes you just look at it and say, no, it doesn't make any sense. It's absolute absurdity.
Some of them are
Within
pure. Some of them are pure insanity.
some of them are pure insanity, and there's no critical reaction. And I'm not saying that we should, attack the other person or be mean to them. And of course, people sometimes confuse these two things. To be critical, it's not to be mean or disrespectful. It's to create a dialogue where you say, but this doesn't make sense. Or you cannot do this connection if you're assuming A, you cannot do B. And this doesn't exist. But that's because, astrology, even if astrological organizations say otherwise, it's still a wild field. Anyone can call himself an astrologer. People do whatever they cross their minds, call it astrology, and it goes.
Everything goes.
Everything goes. And astrological associations and astrological institutions that are trying to do some kind of, unionizing, perhaps that's not the best word, but some kind of consolidation,
some sort of quality control.
They're not doing it. They're not doing it at all, because they just put everything in the same bag. And I've never seen anyone being rejected in years in the astrological community, no matter how dumb or absurd or insane their claims were.
Okay. When you look at the participants in your conference, did you realize there was somebody who lived that problem, not realizing his deficits in critical thinking, or were your participants educated enough to understand what you just talked about?
I think they were, yes. I don't know every one of them.
Okay. Now what you just elaborated on is the field, and there is one problem. When we talk about history of astrology, we are not talking about psychological astrology, but the astrological community is 99 or 90% psychological, and there's a few diaspora people like yourself, traditional astrologers. How do you see the very few traditional astrologers, and there are good and bad ones in this scene as well? And we, in the last talk, we talked about the problem that originally the traditional astrology had a structure, and now this structure experiences the same problem the psychological astrology experiences. Could you elaborate on this problem that the structure of traditional astrology got a little bit destroyed in the process since 2004 to 2023?
Yeah, I can. Well, again, it's not an academic discussion, but now we're going into an astrological discussion. The thing is, and my view on that is that astrology, as any human endeavor, follows fashion, especially when it becomes popular. It becomes fashionable. And when traditional astrology came in, initially at the height of what we call psychological astrology.
For our viewers, let's say the Hindsight Project, and before that, James Holden and Robert Zoller, and that's all in the end of the 20th century.
Yeah,
that's
as an historian. Yeah, but as an historian, let me know, we are very American-centered when we're analyzing things.
Yes.
And Project Hindsight came, and it had its importance, and I'm not diminishing any importance of each contribution that I'm mentioning here, but Project Hindsight is the American reaction, the American process, triggers the American process of integrating and rediscovering traditional astrology. That had been happening for decades in Europe.
That's in Spain, especially in
Spain,
and a little bit in England.
In England,
Yes.
you had people for decades before Project Hindsight trying to make some sense out of the tradition. Not as visible.
Olivia Barclay in England.
Olivia Barclay and several people associated with that kind of group. Sue Ward later on, yes. So these people were
Deborah Holding, not to forget.
Deborah Holding later, yes, but
so and John Frawley.
John Frawley is from that group as well. So this was happening, and it was happening probably somewhere else that I'm not aware of. For example, it could be happening in some groups in Germany, France. I don't know.
Well, we have a little bit of that. That we have Rafael Gilbrand, who is Spanish, who published, rooted on the research work of the Spanish group, even Ragel.
Ragel, yeah.
And he published on the Chiron Verlag, Reinhard Stiele, 2 volumes this thick, Lehrbuch der klassischen Astrologie, which is Manual of the Classical Traditional Astrology, and Matrix, which is Dignities. The Matrix volume is the book about dignities by Raphael Gilbrand is this thick. So we have a sort of publishing tradition since 2000 something in Germany, but the original research was done in Spain.
Yeah,
translating from Castilian Spain into modern Spain. I think the old texts of Ragel.
Exactly. Demetrios Santos was one of the first to do that. I don't know him, or I don't know his work completely, but he's a name that is associated with this initial process of translation, which was then carried out by some more within the astrological community as well, not just academics, also in the astrological community. So this is happening earlier in the world. There are some attempts early in the century as well on that. So this is not an isolated case. So sometimes, and I'm speaking now perhaps as an historian, sometimes the apparent or not so apparent ill will that people have when people get all fan clubbing about the Hindsight project, it's not so much that they're not recognizing their contribution, but they're reacting, and this comes from several conversations I had with other people regarding this, significant people, they're reacting to the fact that they basically ignored all the work that had been done before.
Yes.
You know? And suddenly you're the best, the greatest, best thing in the world. And you think, okay, yeah, it's a good work. And then you have
the problem with Robert Schmidt. There's a sort of cult. Some people are cultish about Robert Schmidt.
Yeah, there is a fan club on there. Yeah, there are a lot of fanboys and fangirls. Exactly. There is that attitude. Yes, I don't know enough about the Hindsight project and its inner dynamics to have a solid opinion on that. I can agree with you on that. There are people who are absolute fans and they're mesmerized with his work.
And that goes as far as that Robert Schmidt identified the inventor of astrology, Eudoxus.
Yeah, well, that's nonsense. You know, that's absolute nonsense.
But they believe that.
Thinking,
they really believe it.
Yeah, they do. But you always think that some ascended entity also brought astrology in this little scroll to the world. But people can think whatever they want, and then there's historical fact and historical evidence of what's really happened. So that's personal belief, and that's again goes back to the problem we were discussing earlier of the lack of proper critical thinking. That runs into that very quickly.
Let's show our German viewers shortly. This is the book, The Himmlische Matrix. This is Würden is the German word for dignities, and you can see here 680 pages. And the manual, Lehrbuch der klassischen, a manual of the classical astrology, that is, how How many pages is that? It doesn't say here. Okay. This is about the same size. So basically, for the German readers, there is something available. Now let's go back to the conference.
Yeah.
When you attended the Amsterdam conference in 2004 and the event with Robert Zoller and the problems there, if you look at those, this is 20 years now, basically more or less 20 years ago. In that period of time, did the approach of the academics to the practicing astrologers change? And same question the other way around, did the approach of practicing traditional astrology, viewing the academic research in history of astrology, did something change there? So both ways. Did something change, or was the situation 2004 about more or less the same quality of today?
Well, I only came to academics properly in 2010. So before that, I don't know the medium very well. But what I've understood is that there is more acceptance of that you could study the history of astrology. There is a little bit more. Some of my colleagues, perhaps because in their own environments and in their own experience, they're more positive, but they say that it's much better. And I understand their points of view, but I think that's still a lot of prejudice and misunderstanding of what we're talking about.
You mean inside the scientific community?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yes. There
So
are
people from outside, let's say from studies of sociology, who have no idea about your field, they wonder what you're doing. They still can't accept the fact that somebody's doing a PhD about Jesuit astrology.
Exactly. And mine is particularly, it's, it creates a shock.
How was that? We will talk in another video about your dissertation, but let's talk generally about your dissertation, not about the content, but how it was received in your personal life surroundings, private people, academic people. When they hear, what are you doing? Oh, I'm doing a PhD in connection with the Warburg Institute and the University of Lisbon about the Jesuit astrology. What was the reaction normally?
Well, it is odd. It is an odd topic. That astrology can be studied historically, especially for an older generation of academics, it's odd. For the public, it's odd, even more odd, because they even cannot understand that astrology can be studied at the university level. And I always have to clarify that we're not studying if astrology works or not. We're studying the history of astrology, because at some point for a great time in human existence, astrology was part of our cosmology, our conception of the world. So it wasn't a matter if it worked or didn't work. It was more a matter of what were the limits of its functioning and how could we run with it? How far could we extend it? That's the main discussion in the pre-modern world. So, but people, this is very complex to explain. This is very complex to explain, and it requires, quite a large introduction for the general public. So you really need to explain that with some care. But even in the academic world, some people, I have cases where people ask, "No, you mean astronomy?" And I said, "No, not astronomy, astrology." Because they wouldn't think, especially in connection with the Jesuits, because then we're talking about a religious order. So the oddness of that situation is even increased further. But still, there is a bit of resistance against those studies. I think it's getting better. I think and this is one of my goals as an academic, is to, and a lot of my colleagues as well, is to establish a history of astrology as a proper discipline, and not having, as it has been done and is still being done, masking it under names to hide the word astrology. It's been doing constantly. Hide, you try to mask, and I'm guilty of that as well. In project proposals, in when I'm applying for funding and all of that, I have to use the word astrology moderately so that you do not generate, a strong reaction to it, and people can understand where I'm getting at, and they read the purpose and not they don't stop at the word astrology. So there's still that care that you need to do, but I don't think we need to be constantly masking it. I think you need to clarify what you're doing to be accepted academically. But that goes for astrology, and that goes for many other things. But you do need to be frontal, on that.
Okay.
But this is a problem, for example, that history of alchemy doesn't have. Because alchemy is not practiced nowadays. So it's more of a romantic thing of the bearded man mixing things at the
Let me interrupt you here at that point. I put up the Amsterdam University History of Hermetic Philosophy and Related Currents. Yeah. We are talking about the same problem that a Dutch woman, a businesswoman with a lot of money, had this problem, as you are mentioning, a couple of decades ago in 1990. She wanted to study Hermeticism, and they couldn't do it in university. So she took money and created the chair of Western esotericism in Amsterdam University. Mm-hmm. And they faced the same problems you were talking about. And the Amsterdam conference in 2004 was organized by this chair, which was created in 1999. So esotericism and Hermetic philosophy and related currents and history of Hermetic philosophy is established as an academic field in Amsterdam since 1999. And what is lacking is a chair of history of astrology.
Oh, yes.
That would be your dream, right?
Yes.
How about a Portuguese woman with a lot of money creating a chair and putting you into the chair as a professor?
Where is she?
that's well, we have rich people who are spending money for the wrong purposes. You would probably agree.
Yeah,
on that.
we would need some funding for that, and we would need an institution, a proper academic institution.
And a university could be Lisbon, because in Lisbon, the University of Lisbon is close to accepting an academic chair for history of astrology. Would you say so, or would you say not that far?
I have my doubts.
Okay.
I have my doubts.
So it would be the Warburg Institute in London, probably, who would.
Yes, I think the Warburg Institute would do it. They have a history of working with that subject, but again, astrology. People easily deal with esotericism, alchemy, magic. There are more appealing topics to be taught at the university than astrology.
Yes.
Astrology has a very specific problem. Astrology is in its essence, is a very specific field, which it's neither here nor there. It's a field in its own, which is neither completely scientific or mathematical, and it's not completely divinatory or prognosticatory. So there is it's its own special mix. So we face that problem in terms of academia as well. You do not have a place, except perhaps for the Warburg Institute, where people can do a PhD in history of astrology. You have perhaps
we have it here. I put it on the screen. In Germany, there is one place, which is Hanover. A good friend of mine, Gustav Adolf Schöner, he was a PhD employee of the University of Hanover in the Institute of Religious Science. And he did a Habilitation, which is the level above the PhD in Germany. You have to have a Habilitation to become a professor in Germany, which is different in your country. And this was published in German as Astrology in the European History of Religion, Continuity and Discontinuity. And this book will be published in English next year.
Oh,
so people
wonderful.
interesting about how far the academic field is accepting studies in history of astrology. Here you have an example on the level of habilitation, which is probably the only habilitation worldwide on astrology, I believe.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you see, academia would be foolish not to acknowledge the impact and the weight that astrology has in human culture. And you can see that from an historical perspective and connect it with science, which is my case, but you could also study current day as a current day phenomenon, you know, a historian of a sociologist, you know, someone who studies modern culture can pick up on astrology and develop. So it is something that is embedded in our culture, even if it's an accepted knowledge or not accepted knowledge. It's embedded in our culture since the beginning of civilization. It's there in one form or another. So to completely whitewash that from historiography, and now returning to history, which is my field, it's absurd. It's like doing a whole history of European culture, completely omitting religion. You can't, because it drives culture. It's there. It's an essential part. And astrology has that kind of same embedding into culture that religion has. They actually interchange. We have certain religious views which are based on cosmological principles and vice versa. There's a continuous dialogue there. And so to ignore that, it's absurd. Like I've seen, for example, historical works on medicine, history of medicine practice in the Middle Ages and in the early modern period, who do not mention astrology at all.
And it was a central part of the practicing practitioners to use astrology. Paracelsus comes to mind.
Exactly. And you have almanacs, public almanacs, you have books, you have a lot of discussion. You might not want to focus your personal approach to the topic by addressing astrology. You know, you can be addressing some other aspect of the history of medicine, which I'm giving here as an example, and not want to go into the astrological bit. But you cannot write a whole book without mentioning it.
Yes.
That's
unscientific.
Can't.
That's unscientific.
Yeah, it's a whole, yeah. You can say,
that's a violation of scientific. That's a violation of scientific principles.
It is. You can say, oh, there's this facet which is very important, but I'm not dealing with it. I'm just looking at this. Fine, perfect. But you cannot do that. You can't. And I'm talking about fairly recent work. So I'm not talking about works of the 70s or the 40s.
I know that fact as well.
Yeah. So it's odd. Even astronomy, history of astronomy, quite a very important field with a lot of weight in the history of science.
Those people still try to say Kepler was not an astrologer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or that old thing that, oh yes, but they only did that for money.
Yes, which is ridiculous. Yeah,
it's
because
ridiculous.
We know from the correspondence of Kepler with Fabricius in Friesland.
Exactly, and from his published work, you don't even need to go to the personal correspondent. You have the published work where he discusses that. Oh, but he's trying to innovate and change. Well, yes, he is, but he's still addressing astrology as something valid. Because from his mind, it is. So why deny it? You know, it's a problem. Well, this happens.
It's a money problem, because if you would have some people with deep pockets who would subsidize your work and the work of your collaborators of this conference, you would have employment in the University of Lisbon to do more research, which is not happening as yet.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we talked about we are talking here about the conference promoted by the Astra project. The Astra project is not funded.
Yes, yes.
It has absolutely no funding behind it, except for the SUPT, that is the hosting institution of the project, which, of course, if I need to travel or I need to go to research or I need to acquire, to invite someone occasionally, they can assist within their limitations with that occasionally. But I don't have, the project doesn't have its own funding like an ERC project might have, or another official academic project.
Did you in our last talk, the 2.5 hours talk, we were discussing the structure of Portuguese funding of scientific work. In Germany, it's the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft. In Portugal, there's a similar organization, organization or by the state, funded by the state, to subsidize scientific research. Did anybody apply to this organization for a grant? Elena got a grant from the Portuguese government for her dissertation. She was funded for full 4 years, full-time funding.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
I also got funded for the PhD project.
By the government or by this scientific organization?
Well, by this organization, but this organization is governmental. It's
so Helena's was also funded by this organization.
Yes.
So basically, they have the experience of 2 PhD people they funded in the past. How is the sociological atmosphere in that organization concerning history of astrology? Are there people interested to do more funding, or did they give the money grudgingly?
Well, you see, that organization is not run by scientists. Okay. It's run by government officials,
bureaucrats like myself. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So they're not academics. There are, of course, academic input, and there are people who have temporary placements there.
I was working as a lawyer in the Ministry of Science in Lower Saxony, and we gave the funds to run all the universities, and we had for every university we had a department running that university. And I was responsible for study certification and quality control. And so basically the Ministry of Science in Lower Saxony controls what happens because they give the funding. They can close a department and they can open a department, and they could close your history department, or they could expand your. So basically my question goes in the direction, your concrete department in the Faculty of Lisbon is the Department of History?
Yes, the Department of History and Philosophy of Science.
Right. It's a small department, as always with these topics, not enough funding. How is your impression? I talked about this with Professor Oestmann in Bremen, who is in History of Science in Berlin as a professor. They have the same problem. Small niche departments in some universities. Highland in Osnabrück is a niche thing. The difference in Munich and in Bavaria is David Just is a large project. This Latin texts of
Ptolemeus Latinus, Arabicus,
but that's the exception. Normally, like in Sweden, Martin Gansen, that's a niche. What's your vision for the future? Is this more declining or more developing? Well, the funding of your work and your people associated with you.
It's always a mystery, because we are, as many things, dependent on the economy. So if there's more money available, you have more funding for postdoctoral positions. And postdoctoral contracts at the university, where you apply with the project, and if that project is accepted, they would fund you for from 3 to 6 years, depending on what kind of level you're applying to. But the acceptance, if we're talking about the acceptance, this is general for any project. If we're talking about, and the humanities, suffer a lot because
Yes.
they look more at patents and technological things than they look at culture, which is what the history and all the humanities produce. They produce culture. They don't produce things, consumable things or technological things. So that's a problem to start with. So it has a much smaller funding in general. But if we're talking about the history of astrology, it is dependent on an external committee. So if I submit, as I have, a project that addresses the study on a particular study or particular aspect of history of astrology, that of the approval and the good evaluation of that project depends on an external committee of experts that's analyzing it. And it depends how they receive the project and how they think it worthy or
It
not.
depends on their biases.
Exactly. And then if it gets approved, if it gets a high grade, let's say, in terms of evaluation, it's still subject to how many can the institution fund for that particular time period. So even if you get a very good grade, you might be below the line of budget, you know, so you don't get funded. So there's a lot of there's many variables, so it's very difficult to say if there's a specific bias in that institution against the history of astrology, because there might be not, because that's dependent on the evaluators. And then once they're funding, they're not looking at the topics. Those are approved by the experts. And then, you know, there's a list of evaluations. And then it's through that list of evaluations that they decide who to fund, until when, you know, until what placement the funding goes to or not. So there's a lot of variables here. So it's difficult to say because we don't know who the evaluators are exactly until the very last minute. And that doesn't mean, you know, I've seen people who might have some bias against the history of astrology, but if a project or if an idea is presented properly, you know, it's well thought out, it's substantiated, they know how to read the evidences. If you have evidences, that's not a problem necessarily. They might not agree completely with my point of view or other people's point of view, but the evidence is there. If it's well presented, it's fine. That's how it should be in academia. If you don't agree completely, if it's well presented, if it's well constructed, the idea, then okay, it's an idea, it's a point of view. I don't have to agree with it.
Yeah.
I can even criticize it, the weak points or the strong and weak points. That's how it should be done. So it's difficult, but in academia, it's still a difficult thing to explain. It's odd. Astrology is odd.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons, and the beginning of my conversation, is that this is the reason why I separate very clearly anything to do with astrology and practice of astrology and anything to do with academic studies of astrology. It's two separate things. And
Did you have the impression when you personally applied for funds in this governmental structure in your position in the University Department of History and Science, was it disadvantages for your applications that you are the headmaster of a astrological school?
Well,
did that help or did that not help?
Well, it's not mentioned. That has nothing to do with.
But it's easy to find you.
It is. It's not something that's hidden.
Normally, no. I would think that the evaluators would research the people who are applying.
As far as I'm aware, no.
Oh.
As far as I'm aware, no. I don't know.
But everybody does that. Research the people we are talking about.
I don't know if they did. They might have done it. I don't know.
You never got a feedback. This is a problem that you're running this school of astrology.
No, and if someone would have said, "Oh, I'm not approving this project, or I'm giving a bad grade because this person
I'm not giving state money to a teaching astrologer,"
that opens a very complicated can of worms for them.
Okay, but they might think
that's the same. That's the same as saying, I'm not going to give a grant for this study of religious art, because this person is a very devout Catholic.
Yeah, that's the same kind of one.
It's
Yeah.
not the same thing, but it's on the same level.
It's on the same level.
You see?
Now,
So
I suppose our viewers are getting unrest that we don't talk about the conference, which we will do now.
yeah.
Now, here's the conference. Now, this is after more than 1 hour nice talking. We go right into the subjects.
Yeah.
So let's start with David Just. What did he talk about?
Well, he was talking about the history of the calculation of the Almutin in Latin works. So how is the reception and development of the method of calculating the Almutin of the chart, the Almutin figuris, and the several variances and transmissions of that process. So it was
and that people can see in detail when it's uploaded, so we don't have to explain what Almuten is for people who don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was a very interesting and technical talk, so it was quite interesting.
Were you surprised that David Just chose this topic?
No, not really. I think it's
did he choose the topic, or did you give it to him?
He chose. Everyone chose their topics. Of course, they proposed it to me, but no, I didn't. There wasn't a topic I didn't disagree. I just called the attention that I want something. The idea of the conference is always to address the practice of astrology.
The tools
astrology
of the
as
art,
a practice, the tools or its practice, not so much the sociological impact. That has been done lots of times, but this hasn't been done enough, I think.
Okay, Dorian Greenbaum, the author of the famous book The Daimon. What did she talk about?
Well, Dorian made a very interesting study, and she's still developing it, on the origins of interrogations. So
you mean orrery?
Orrery astrology, what we call nowadays orrery astrology. So she was trying to gather and collect all the historical sources that lead to the appearance of that particular branch of astrological practice. And because, as you know, we do not have it in the earlier versions of astrology. You do not have a specific branch for questions, and it's not as obvious how they develop. They simply appeared all of a sudden. Well, that's not exactly the case, but that's what she's addressing. That kind of development of the horary in astrology.
And we can see the lecture in the original soon on the Ad Astra channel.
Yes.
So the grand seigneur of history of astrology, Charles Burnett, what was his topic?
Well, he was addressing a specific technique and its sources, which is the attempting to identify a thief through astrology, usually an interrogation or an orrery question, and trying to get the name of the robber. And all the methodologies that exist in the tradition, and one of these expertise, which is the transmission of an idea through the sources. So he was exploring how that idea is transmitted and then appears in the early modern period, adapted from Arabic names and Greek and Arabic names then to European names, and all that process. So it's also quite an interesting study.
Did you record the question and answer sessions as well, or just the lecture?
I did.
So we will have the whole conference, including the question and answer session, on your channel.
Exactly.
That's great. That is really great. Okay, 15 hours. Jeffrey Kotick. Is that correct? Kotick?
Kotick, yeah.
Kotick, yeah.
Yeah.
What did he do?
He was he presented examples of astrological practice, again, Buddhist astrology, in Japanese context. So he is giving us the medieval approach again, but in a completely different setting. than Europe. So Japan, with all that, with the Buddhism tradition, so also a very interesting topic to see different methodologies, different principles of how that is applied, on similarities and differences. So it's quite an interesting talk. Then we had Petra Schmidl,
which
who
is a
an
German
Arabist.
researcher.
Yeah, exactly. And an Arabist.
Basically, what would you say the German research scene in the worldwide scene? How would you evaluate their position
In terms of
international connections? Is
no,
Germany a hub of history of astrology, and
well,
London and Portugal, and that's it, or is Germany on the side?
well, I don't think there is a hub currently.
Okay.
There's no specific center where this happens. The Warburg Institute used to be, perhaps not so much today. I don't know. It depends on if you're doing, how many people there are doing this kind of work. But there's no center. But we have a lot of German scholars of very very noteworthy German scholars into the history, working in the history of astrology. Some big names, or people who have, worked on the history of astrology in continuity.
That
Or
is
people,
Wolfgang Hübner and Stefan Hein, for example.
yeah, Stefan Hein, Gunther Hostmann, who will speak also in a while.
In
But
Bremen, yeah.
Petra Schmidl, she's not so much a historian of astrology, but her research also intersects with the history of astrology. But you have others.
Do you have a network in the Department of Religious Science in Hanover? I was studying there for a couple of years after my retirement. They had Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil is an internet-based network of people of the departments of science worldwide. Is Ad Astra interested in creating something like that? They have chats every day.
Well, I'm working on that at
Oh,
this
you
point.
you do.
We don't have it at this point, but I'm working.
Sort of a chat room for historians of history of astrology.
Yes, I'm. You see, the problem with the Astra project, it's mostly me doing things.
Yeah, I know.
I build the
yeah.
website, I organize things.
So people out there with deep pockets realize you are needed. Give some money to Portugal.
Yeah, but I'm trying to implement that, and I hope by the latest October, so the next school year, I would have next academic year, I will have that implemented online.
Oh, very good. So back to Professor Schmiedl. What was she talking about?
She was talking about what has been her research in the last years, which is the book of I don't even know how to pronounce these names. Al-Ashfarat Umar's Kitab al-Tafsira, the Tafsira,
Okay.
which is a book of knowledge, and which has astronomy, culture, history, astrology. So it has a lot of topics, many astrological, and I have the pleasure of working. I have worked and been working with her in some aspects of this astrological material, and she was presenting elections. So those very popular, useful elections for things: when to plant a tree, when to play chess, when to
or when
eat
to
food.
found Baghdad as a town.
Not the level of complexity, more down daily,
Oh,
down
okay.
to earth
Okay.
kind of elections. So it was quite interesting because it's a different source coming from a more popular approach to astrology and how to practice it. So it was quite interesting.
And then we have the recent PhD, Levente Laszlo. Congrats
Levente
again.
Laszlo, yeah. Which is has done a very good PhD on Byzantine astrological materials. Levente presented some of the examples of his work, but he did a very interesting analysis of how an astrologer works. Let me see if I can explain it very quickly, but people will be able to see it soon. How does the the method of organizing all the information extracted from the chart goes into a judgment, an astrological judgment. So it's quite an interesting perspective, and he did a very good analysis of the meta aspects of astrological interpretation, traditionally speaking and medievally speaking, of course.
And then we have Jean-Patrice Boudet.
Yeah, another grand seigneur of astrology.
How old is
the
he?
history of astrology. I'm not sure, but he's a retired scholar at this point.
So he's an old seigneur.
Yeah, he's a mature a mature scholar, and he has been perhaps the scholar that has mostly contributed to the development of the history of astrology in France.
Oh, okay.
He is what I could call the big name of history of astrology in France. He has explored a lot of that material. He has studied French medieval aspects of astrology.
Does that mean that Helena had a lot to do with him because she was doing her dissertation on Belle?
Yeah, I would say that he is almost the spiritual advisor for Helena. He was never an official advisor, but he was a sort of spiritual advisor to her work, because she was picking up on materials that he had already studied, or at least give some approach. And so they exchanged a lot, regarding.
So we could say Boudet is in the background of the dissertation of Helena Avila about the work of the French astrologer Belle in the end of the 15th century.
Yeah, a big influence. And and recently even he updated some of his he published a collection of his main papers, updating them with the new information. And part of that information came from Helena's study, because she by focusing on Belle, she discovered new material that he wasn't aware it existed. So so yes, he's as I say, the spiritual advisor of Helena's work, and also he presented Richard Fournivals, was also a big figure of astrology and culture in medieval France, and he was discussing attributions of certain texts to him that have been attributed to other people.
Okay, and now we're coming to Steven van den Brugge, Netherlands.
Yeah.
What university does he come from? Groningen?
No, Steven comes from, I should know this, Ghent, I think.
Ah, yeah, right, Ghent, yeah.
Ghent, yeah. I'm terrible with names, people's names, place names. It's a horror.
He's a Grand Seigneur too, isn't he?
Sorry,
he's a Grand Seigneur too.
Not yet. He's a very no. He's
younger then.
Yes. He's young. He's a figure that has been, how shall I say, a constant presence and a constant contributor to the history of astrology in the last 2 decades.
Okay, let me ask you this. The Arius journal is a journal for the religious science, and esotericism aspects are often published there. Is there a plan or a group of people planning a journal for history of astrology?
So far, no. The only thing that we have even closely resembled that is the one published by Nick Campion.
That's Cosmos and Culture.
Cosmos and Culture. I was thinking of correlations another thing. It's Cosmos and Culture. It's the only one where history of astrology features more but I think it's everywhere,
okay. You're right. We have this journal. It's Cosmos and Culture of Nick
Cosmos
Campion.
and Culture.
We don't need a new one. That's the one which should be expanded.
Yeah. It's not so much focusing on history of astrology, just on the history of astrology, but it does have a lot of history of astrology content. But you have also, the big mainstream journals feature a lot of astrological material. You have the Annals of Science, you have Early Science and Medicine, the Journal for the History of Astronomy, feature quite regularly very important papers on astrology or astrology related materials. So,
and we have the historical event of your own journal, which was discontinued in 2010, I believe.
yeah, the tradition. Well, but that was not intended as an academic journal, but
it was close.
It was close.
It
Yeah, I
was
think
close.
it was
You had
close.
nearly
Yes.
you nearly had peer review something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, go back to our German representative, Professor Dr. Gunther Oestmann. Some of my videos are with him.
Yeah.
And you have quite a number of videos with him, so people can find a lot of information about Günther Oestmann on YouTube. What was he talking about?
Well, he was talking about the problems of errors and copy errors, you know, calculation errors in early modern horoscopes. So that why certain errors exist, why there are some mistakes are made. Are they copy mistakes? Are they calculation?
Okay. For that topic, why is it wrong to use a computer when you are researching a classical historical horoscope? Why could you elaborate for our viewers? We both know the answer to the question, but the viewers don't know about this problem.
Yeah,
it is wrong to use a modern computer to look at a traditional horoscope. Could you elaborate for our viewers why it's wrong?
Yeah, well, it's not totally wrong, but it would be incomplete because certainly modern computational methods of planetary positions will give different results from
exactly
those.
You wouldn't understand the historical figure doing the delineation because he would have to rely on tables.
Yeah.
And if you replace the probably wrong tables with modern computers, then everything got messed up. Right?
Exactly. And sometimes you're saying, oh, he got a mistake in this planetary position. And well, he didn't. He followed the tables.
That's what I wanted to transfer to the viewers. There is a problem if you're doing history of astrology and you're looking at concrete horoscopes. There are some, and you do the mistake to put on your computer and calculate the horoscope. You are so much misled. You have to go in, dive into the old books, and that's the only way to do research.
Even the time notation. The time notation is different. They calculate time and count time in a different way. So the time that we're seeing on that chart data from, let's say, medieval, early modern period, it will not be the same as inputting that exact number on the computer. It's going to give a huge error.
And so that was what Günther Oestmann was addressing in part. Okay.
Yeah.
Now you got yourself. What did you do? And,
well,
for the viewers, if you put in Luis Ribeiro in YouTube, you find a lot of information. I think you're 15 hours now, or 20 hours, something like that.
Perhaps I haven't I haven't measured yet that. But what I was addressing was the phenomenon of increasing mathematization of astrology in the early modern period, and I was discussing several aspects of that, but I was addressing specifically as the main example the weighing of essential and accidental dignities. So while David Just was dealing with the calculation of the Almuten and he addressed the scoring of essential dignities, I was doing a complementary work on the scoring of accidental dignities. So when do they start attributing numbers and weights to retrograde motion, slow or fast, and all of that? So that was my approach. Now here's the channel.
And all the videos will be uploaded to this channel, right?
Exactly.
The Astra project. And if you look here, there was a first workshop. You can delight yourself with this first workshop. And as you can see, if you want to watch it all, it's more than 70 videos.
Yeah. Yeah, you have hours and hours of
Yes.
very
Yes.
interesting conversations on the history of astrology, and in several aspects, because one of the things that Elena and I made clear when funding the podcast, which came in August, it started on August 2020, was to have casual, not academic lectures, but casual conversations with academics and researchers on the history of astrology in their research, their perspectives, and all of that. And the podcast has been a bit more slow in outputting, but I'm still recording it, and now I had to decide on editing, taking care of the edition of the videos of the conference. But I will, the podcast is continuing with new interviews, and it will continue. I have two very interesting interviews that I'm editing at this point and should come out also soon.
How do you explain the fact that you are in the range of 300 to 500 people looking at these videos? That's not that many. Or is that many if you're considering the scene?
Well, if I'm considering that history of astrology is a very niche academic subject, I think we have very good, a very good number of views. I'm pleased. You know, this is not made to have thousands and thousands and thousands of viewers. This is made for to give an idea to researchers, to inform the public in general, but also researchers or people who want to research topics on the history of astrology or on other cultural aspects of astrology. They can come here and see and hear several voices, opinions, points of view on that matter. And that is the thing, you know. So it has the numbers that it has. I would like it to be, I do want that people know it exists so that they can access them if they want, but I'm not focusing here on numbers. I'm focusing here on interested viewers. So the fact that, for example, we have here this interview we did with Philip Graves and his huge astrological library, the fact that he has 422, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
You know, it's wonderful because it means that people, lots of people were interested in his work. So right. Yeah.
Okay, now let's get back to our conference program.
Mm-hmm.
And then after the lunch break, Stefan Heilen online. What was his topic?
He was, well, as the title says, is on John Ludbeck's predictions of the Antichrist, and the very
is that part of his large book project?
I think so. I think he presented more technical aspects of that prediction, but yes, it is part of his current research work, which is that huge thick volume.
The first volume has already appeared, right?
Yeah, which I'm very glad to have a copy of. Unfortunately, is in German, so which is not a language I read or speak. So it does give a few problems. But I have several volumes of history of astrology in German. You know, thank God for Google Lens. And to friends that are German or speak German,
do you have the electronic copy or the printed version?
I have the printed version.
Why not the electronic copy? Because that would make it easier for you to copy and paste and translate.
I simply don't have the PDF for that. I do have some things I have PDFs, but I always like to.
You should probably ask him to send you the PDF. That would make your understanding of his book easier.
Yeah.
I don't know whether he's allowed to do that because it's a project.
That's always a problem. That's a problem because you cannot distribute the PDFs because the PDFs have a copyright to the publisher, and you really can't. You really can't. If things are not in open access, you really cannot.
And finally, Martin Gunston. Would you say he is an Indian astrologer? A eotish astrologer and an
No,
academic?
I don't think he's a Yotish astrologer. He is an astrologer and an academic.
But
I
he's
don't.
a sidereal astrologer at least.
Yes, he is.
He's
Yes.
not tropical, he's sidereal.
Yeah, but he's not. His methodologies are not, as far as I'm understand, derived from Indian astrology.
Oh, okay. What did he talk about?
He was making a reflection on the so how the fact that someone can be practicing astrology can contribute positively or negatively to the historical study of astrology. So in fact, what we were discussing earlier,
Yeah.
how impactful that was. So he was making an initial reflection, thinking of that and exploration of that matter. He was intended to be the first opening work of the program because of his topic, but unfortunately we had to switch it with David Just because of time zone matters. But he closed it very well with his presentation. Yeah.
And after that visit to the monastery, and while we get some impressions of the monastery, coming back to Martin Gansten and the sidereal versus tropical problem, you yourself are a tropical astrologer, and in your research of history of astrology, what's your thinking about this? Well, let me be clear. In my opinion, the aberration of sidereal astrology. Do you have an historical finding how this came about? Why on earth did people get to sidereal astrology?
Well, actually, it's how people got to tropical, because the initial, as far as we are aware, although there are people who say otherwise,
Like Reinhard Stiele strongly would disagree with you that tropical came later.
Yeah, but it depends how you define things, really.
Yeah, okay.
It really depends how you define things, because the equinoxes and the solstices are key points in the construction of the zodiac. And I'm speaking about this, and I don't have a complete or enough knowledge on this specific matter to be giving you a consistent historical opinion. But of course, the zodiac has a construction around the seasons, because it's the path of the sun always, sidereal or tropical. So there's a seasonal component of solstices and equinoxes to the zodiac. But as far as I'm aware of the evidences that I know, and I do not know enough about this, especially in the early centuries of the history of astrology, most of the tables are sidereal. It's only when Ptolemy changes officially, let's say, if we can say it like this, more impactfully, the concept of the signs being defined by the
I would love to have you do
equinoxes.
a Zoom conference with Reinhard Stiele. That would
Yeah.
be. Would you be willing to discuss what you just said because he has a very deep knowledge on this problem, sidereal tropical.
As I told you, I'm glad to discuss things with him, but I don't have probably enough expertise to do a proper discussion, because I haven't studied these things in particular. I would love to hear what he thinks about it, of course. But as I always like to see other points of view, and he might have evidence on the contrary. But the earlier charts are sidereal, as far as I'm aware from my readings of other people's work. So it's only when Ptolemy introduces with the Tetrabiblos the definition of the zodiac by a seasonal structure that becomes a more defined concept, I would say. That's where it has more impact. Before that, it's either sidereal or unclear. And for most time, people are discussing in a time frame sometimes where we have the evidences where it's not very clear which one they're using because they're almost coinciding with each other. So are we talking about an error in calculation, or are we talking about sidereal versus tropical position? I think that's a problem that I have been reading about in my studies.
And your studies is basically Middle Ages, right?
Late Middle Ages, late Middle Ages and early modern. So by then, sidereal is completely off Western astrology and especially European astrology.
So it wouldn't be fair to ask an opinion of yourself about the Hepson-Peter series. That's not your cup of tea.
That's not really my cup of tea, you know. What I know is their sources, their earlier sources. Have they existed or not?
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows, but I'll probably know the same as you do because what I know is from reading other people's research on that. So it's not really my time frame.
And we should not forget that all the documents we are talking about in physical evidence is after 1200. We don't have original sources.
Exactly.
How do you deal with that fact? That's always nagging, isn't it?
It is, but it depends on what the problem is and what you're looking for. My view is that concepts, and speaking of the Astra and the work that the Astra intends to do, again, concepts develop through time. Evolve, perhaps it's not the right word to use here, but they develop through time. So initially there are some concepts, and then they become more specific, more more structured. And what I've seen from my knowledge of my overall knowledge of the technical aspects of astrology throughout time is that there is a coherent core of ideas and concepts and practices that maintains constant and constitutes the cornerstone and the backbone of astrological practice. Then you have technological developments where you have more precise mathematics, better instrumentation to calculate better positions. And you have, of course, theories, opinions, and methods that are created along the history of astrology as a natural development of a body of knowledge. So we have to take that into account. And so the beginnings are very important to see where things are rooted. What are the concepts where things are rooted? But if I'm studying the practice of an astrology, let's say in the 14th century or the 15th century, I have to address his methodologies, his methodological problems, his practical structures, and I have to fixate it at that. It's irrelevant if what Netcepto and Peto series did or did not, if they existed or not. It's not relevant. You know, there's a lineage of development and the history that leads to that point in time which I'm analyzing. So you need to be clear about that. And this is in history. That's why we've talked about we need to use the tables of the period to reconstruct the charts. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit an approximation, and approximation most of the time is not enough. Sometimes it is, but most of the time it's not. Now, if you shift onto astrology, and I think we discussed this earlier in our earlier talks, and to the current practice of traditional astrology within the traditionalists, there is this. Let me see if I can find a nice, non-offensive word for it. A rather utopic view that at the beginning they knew what they were doing and they had the perfect methods, the perfect set of methods, and everything that comes after that is a corruption of some sort of these initial pristine methods. This kind of idea is recurrent in history. And usually it can be very damaging to the development of any body of knowledge, this pristine thing, because these pristine things makes errors. Our vision of the past is necessarily incomplete. We never have the full picture, and as new evidences appear, and we do hope that they appear from time to time, our knowledge of history changes. So conclusions that we were firmly believing as so in one moment can be completely upturned within a decade or two. So to have this, oh, this was a correct thing and everything else is a corruption, I think it's a huge mistake. And I don't matter how offensive this can be, and a very ignorant point of perspective to have. Because most of the time in history, we derive what was happening before to its developments. Because contrary to us, people in, let's say, late antiquity, 4th, 5th century, have access to much more information on what came earlier than we'll ever have today. Because so much has been lost,
yes,
which was not lost to them. So if they're changing something, if there's a methodology that is appearing that doesn't appear to fit well with what they're doing 2 centuries early, it didn't pop up for a reason. And astrologers specifically are very used to our modern, current day, 21st century view of things, which is anyone gets to a conference, and we're getting back to a thing we've already arrived. Everyone gets to a conference, it blurts out an idea being absolutely fantastic or an absolute nonsense, and everyone applauds. That didn't happen in the past. If you didn't fund and really consolidate any technique you would present as a novelty to a larger public, especially in the written book, which is the main sources where these discussions are taking place, they would eat you alive. They would ignore you. They would say very mean things to you, and they wouldn't be shy about it. They say, this man is a complete idiot by saying such a thing. You have examples of that throughout history.
yes,
And especially there are, for example, Ezra that we mentioned early because of Ezra.
He's quite clear about it. He's quite clear about
brutal. It's absolutely brutal in his criticism of other people, being right or not. So that happens. There is a debate, a very intense debate on how things should work or not. So they are very careful. So we cannot assume that these apparent changes or corruptions in the methodology are someone decided to invent that and just propose it. It didn't work that way. It can, but that would be the least likely thing to happen at that point in time. So people cannot project their own reality into historical matters. Of course, you can only do this to a certain percentage because you're always bound to your own view, and we are all product of our own times and cultures. So we're always biased in one way or another. But there are levels where you cannot do this, and this is why I was referring earlier. Then it's just not a readership of the old sources, and there are people out there who have much more deeper knowledge of earlier periods of the history of astrology than I do, but you do not have the academic training. And a good academic training, there was also bad academic training, but a good academic training is essential so that you can test if your assumptions and your deductions are correct or not. And you have to have this community of peer reviewings that mirrors your own conclusions and can tell you, wait, but you cannot conclude that. You're missing this piece of evidence which you are not familiar with, or you're not looking at this, or this is correct, but you can only assume this if this is correct. So you need that kind of input so that you reach the best conclusion possible. And even so, you might get it wrong. And, for example, my book just came out, but I'm sure that in a couple of years, I would write it differently, or I would reach different conclusions on some of the topics, because that's a natural evolution. And someone picking up that material some years from now
let me
might do
conclude
something
our
different.
very nice and interesting talk with a heretic question. What you elaborated on is the idea of academic discourse, including critical thinking and peer review structures.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at university today, especially in the United States, have they got insane?
I don't know.
Because what happens today, we have 58 genders, we have all sorts of wokeism in universities, which is contradictory to academic discourse like you described it, and critical thinking and all that. Where is academia going? In your gut feeling, is it a lost cause?
No, I don't think so. I think times are changing. And what we're seeing is the change of times and the change of cultural perspectives. And we're still in the flow of that. Okay. We haven't reached a point where this kind of changes that you're mentioning.
We haven't reached the point of no return, you think? Not yet.
I don't think, not yet. Definitely these new points of view are embedded already, because they have consolidated enough that we don't know what to do with them. So that's usually a good thing for this thing to happen. But I don't think we reached the maturity point of that process. So I really don't know how that is going to happen. But
do you have personal problems with that in your everyday life?
No.
Doesn't affect you?
No.
Okay.
It's not something that has affected me in any way.
Okay. I think we could leave that topic for other people to discuss further.
Yes. I'm probably not the best person.
We both are probably not the most interesting people in that topic.
Yeah.
Well, did I miss anything important talking about your Astra conference 2023?
Well, let me think. Well, the conference, as I told you, and by the title, it was to address and to sort of present the project. It's already a few years late. The project has presented itself in other ways.
Basically, the conference was the idea to present the Ad Astra project to the public.
The Astra project, the Ad Astra, it's the podcast. But it was a way to case show how you can do this kind of research.
So we have two projects. The Ad Astra project is the podcast, and the Astra, and the Astra.
Yeah, we have one project, which is the Astra project, and within the Astra project, there is an academic podcast which is called the Ad Astra.
Oh, okay.
And
this conference was presenting the Astra project.
The Astra project as a whole. Now it was already a further step because it was developing, but it's the idea here, the objective here is to make academic connections, to allow academics to debate on these matters of the technical aspects and the practices of the historical practices of astrology, and to create a network where these connections can come. So when you earlier talk about a network, I'm trying to implement that in a practical way, and also not only we'll have the lectures, but if we should have perhaps sometime next year, an edited volume with all the papers that were presented.
There will be a publication of the conference.
There will be a publication. It's
like the one
ongoing.
of 2004, which was published later. Okay.
Yeah, and including other people who could not be there at all.
Okay, so it will be an enlarged edition of the conference.
Exactly.
Oh, very good. That sounds very interesting.
And you're seeing the draft version of this research in the talks, and then in a few months, perhaps in a year time, perhaps you'll be seeing the developed written form of those
and
same
the footnotes and all that. Okay.
With the footnotes, with all the juicy stuff, let's say.
So congratulations to a rather successful project.
Thank you.
Basically, two people, Helena Avila and Luis Ribeiro, bringing it into life.
Yeah.
With the input of the 2018 conference in Warburg and the presentation of the big book of the Great Introduction by Abu Mashar by Charles Burnett.
Exactly, and with all the people who have supported, all those scholars, which we've seen in the team have supported in one form or another the project, and they've been wonderful supporters. The SUPT has been wonderful in housing, and giving an academic home to the project, which is very important. The Warburg as well. The IKGF also participated, but
you said the project is ending in Erlangen, Nuremberg.
Yes, as far as I'm aware.
Completely discontinued?
Yes.
Oh, that's too bad. Okay.
That's a loss. These projects have a time of life. Once the funding ends and the project usually runs for certain number of years. And I think it's ending. I don't know the whole details, but I think it's at its end. It's just closing down certain still running projects. But it should.
So, anything to add, or did we cover it in your opinion?
Well, I think we covered it all, and I hope people enjoy the lectures as much as we enjoy them in live. And I should be launching them later this week, beginning of next week, depends on.
So, in the name of our viewers and myself, thank you very much for, again, a very nice talk, very interesting.
Thank you for having
different from the last one. And I stop the recording, and then you have to tell me about this coffee talk.